Welcome to The Explainer. Forget bad teachers, forget lazy students, forget dropping millions on high school tutoring. What if I told you your ninth grade test scores were literally locked in before you even took your first breath? Yeah, the damage wasn't done in a classroom, it was done at -6 months.
Let's just completely shatter the whole illusion of merit for a second. The core question here is beautifully simple, but honestly, it's incredibly dark. Can just 30 days of mild hunger during pregnancy destroy a 16-year-old's academic future? And to be clear, we are not talking about extreme starvation here. We're literally talking about missing lunch. The answer is going to shock you.
-0.39. Now, I know that just sounds like a random math stat, but in education data, this is an absolute earthquake. It's not just a slight dip in grades. This is the difference between passing and failing. It's the gap between a good career and a lifetime of struggle. And it's caused by an invisible biological trap that snapped shut 16 years earlier.
So grades being fixed before birth? Let's look at how researchers actually uncovered this.
Here is the cruelest truth of all. The rich can buy their way out of biological disadvantages, but the poor absolutely cannot. We always start the education clock way too late, don't we? Skill formation actually kicks off at conception. If a wealthy family has a kid with a learning delay, they just hire tutors. A poor family doesn't have that luxury. So a minor health hiccup in the womb becomes a permanent lifelong scar if you don't have the cash to fix it.
To prove this, scientists needed a brilliant natural experiment. Because, obviously, you can't ethically starve pregnant women in a lab.
So they found a stroke of absolute genius in real-world data out of Denmark. They tracked pregnant Muslim immigrants whose 9-month pregnancies just naturally happened to overlap with Ramadan, which, if you didn't know, involves a 1-month period of fasting during daylight hours. It's a perfectly random, entirely natural experiment happening right out in the real world.
Think of this like a scientific detective story. How do you catch an invisible academic killer? Well, Denmark tracks literally everything. So researchers found the 16-year-old students in the national registry, pinpointed the exact dates they were in utero, and cross-referenced that with the lunar calendar for Ramadan. Then they just pulled their 9th grade test scores. It's elegant, it's massive, and it's built entirely on hard, indisputable data.
But they had to be absolutely sure, right? Like, what if kids born in winter just score lower anyway? Or what if it's just the stress of being an immigrant? To bulletproof the data, they compared these students to non-Muslim immigrants from the exact same backgrounds. Both groups survived the cold Danish winter, both faced the same exact societal hurdles, but only the fasting group showed the academic drop. Mind-blowing.
Which brings us to a deeply uncomfortable finding. This is essentially a cruel punishment specifically targeting poor girls.
We love to think public schools level the playing field. Well, the data violently disagrees. The academic damage from that skip meal completely bypasses wealthy families. They show virtually zero drop. But the poor, vulnerable girls, they take a devastating hit. The biological shock of skip meals squarely targets the most disadvantaged.
The brutal truths in this data are just staggering. If you lack resources, a minor nutritional hiccup in the womb is basically a life sentence. The damage is incredibly concentrated on lower-income families. And get this, girls suffer massive drops in language skills. But boys, bizarrely, boys show almost no verbal drop at all, just a slight penalty in math. Ultimately, if a mother lacks education and employment, it practically guarantees the worst possible academic outcomes for her kids 16 years later.
Timing is literally everything here. The first and second trimesters are an absolute danger zone. If you look at the breakdown, math and science show almost no change. But Danish and English? Massive, massive drops. Why? Because the fetal brain is rapidly wiring its language centers early in pregnancy. Cutting off daytime calories during that specific window permanently disrupts how that wiring forms. Now you might be thinking, we already know starvation is bad, but this totally crushes previous famine studies.
Past science relied on extreme, horrific tragedies. Things like the 1944 Dutch hunger winter, where starving mothers literally ate tulip bulbs just to survive. But this is modern-day Denmark, a rich, wealthy welfare state. This research proves that you don't need a massive famine to cause damage. Even mild, everyday nutritional shifts in a modern society leave permanent, irreversible scars.
The stakes here are absolutely astronomical. The authors put it perfectly. You cannot fix poverty at age 16 if the brain was already biologically disadvantaged at -6 months. Governments are out here pouring billions into high school job programs and tutoring, but this data screams that policymakers are showing up to the fight a decade and a half too late.
But to be completely impartial, we have to talk about the study's fatal flaw. Because of the way the data was collected, the researchers had to use what's called an intent-to-treat analysis. That's a fancy way of saying they measure the impact of the fasting month simply existing without actually knowing if the specific subjects participated in it.
And that's the ultimate reality check here. We don't actually know if a single mother in this study actually fasted. They relied purely on administrative data. They knew these mothers were pregnant, they knew they were Muslim, and they knew it was Ramadan. But there were no personal diaries, no dietary logs, just overlapping calendar dates.
This leaves us with some massive missing pieces. Did mothers overcompensate by eating heavy, nutrient-dense meals at night? Was the academic drop really from missing calories, or was it just the stress and dehydration of the month? And remember the boys. There's a really dark biological theory here. Male fetuses are notoriously fragile. It's entirely possible the nutritional shock actually culled the weaker boys in the womb, leaving only the absolute strongest to even survive to take the exams. Wild, right?
I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought. We argue endlessly over school funding, right? Teacher quality, iPad programs, you name it. But if skipped lunches during pregnancy permanently lower a kid's reading score 16 years later, are we entirely missing the point? If we truly genuinely want educational equality, shouldn't our policies start before a child is even born? Thanks for joining us on this explainer. See you next time.